I remember it like it happened yesterday. My husband Ryan and I were sitting in our cozy living room, the kind of evening where the world feels quiet, with only the crackling fireplace and the occasional rustle of a blanket to break the silence. We'd been married for 10 years, a decade filled with highs, lows, and everything in between. Ryan was my best friend, my rock, and my partner in Crimea, so I thought, that night, Ryan looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger or sadness, it was something off. He cleared his throat and said, "Evelyn, there's something I've been thinking about." Naturally, I braced myself. I assumed this was the usual talk about bills, work stress, or maybe even a surprise vacation. Wishful thinking, I know. But what came out of his mouth made my heart drop. "What would you think about spending time with someone else?" he asked, his voice steady, but his eyes avoiding mine. I laughed nervously, waiting for the punchline. "Spending time? Like with friends?" "No," he said firmly, his gaze finally locking onto mine. "I mean, what if you connected with another man just for one night?" For a second, I thought I misheard him. This was Ryan, the man who once got jealous because a waiter smiled too much while taking my order, and now he was suggesting what exactly? I felt my face flush. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Ryan leaned forward, his tone soft but insistent. "I've been reading about this thing couples do they bring someone else into their relationship to spice things up." My stomach churned. Spice things up? Was he bored with me? Did he think I wasn't enough? And then he dropped another bombshell. "There's this guy I know, Logan. We work out at the same gym. I think he'd be perfect." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ryan had already picked someone. Lagana man I'd only seen in passing, tall, confident, and with a presence that filled any room he walked into. "Ryan, have you lost your mind?" I snapped, standing up so quickly that my blanket fell to the floor. This is insane. But instead of backing down, Ryan remained calm, almost unnervingly so. "Just think about it," he said. "I wouldn't suggest this if I didn't think it could bring us closer." Closer? How could something like this bring us closer? My mind raced with questions and emotions, shock, confusion, anger, and even a twinge of curiosity I wasn't ready to admit. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Ryan's words replayed in my head. A part of me feared what this suggestion meant for our marriage. Was this the beginning of the end? Or was there something I wasn't seeing? The days went on, and Ryan didn't bring it up again. But his suggestion lingered like a shadow in the room. Just when I thought I'd pushed it out of my mind, Logan appeared in a way I never expected. The days following David's unexpected suggestion passed in a haze. I tried to bury myself in routine laundry, errands, work, but nothing felt normal. David's words had unraveled something in me, something I couldn't ignore. And then Jerome appeared in our lives, as if summoned by David's persistence. One Saturday morning, as I sat sipping my coffee and trying to convince myself this was all a bad dream, David casually mentioned, "Jerome's coming over for dinner tonight." I froze. "What?" David smiled, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "He's new in town, says he hasn't had a home-cooked meal since moving here. I thought it'd be nice to invite him over. No pressure, of course." No pressure. Sure, the whole situation reeked of pressure. That evening, I busied myself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a nervous energy that wouldn't dissipate. When the doorbell finally rang, I heard David's cheerful greeting and Jerome's deep, smooth voice in response. Steeling myself, I stepped out of the kitchen. Jerome was even more striking up close broad shoulders, a confident posture, and a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hi," I said, forcing politeness into my voice. "Pleasure to finally meet you," he replied, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his gaze steady. Dinner went surprisingly well. Jerome was charming and easygoing, regaling us with stories about his work as a fitness trainer and his childhood in a small southern town. David, oddly quiet, spent most of the evening watching the dynamic between Jerome and me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When Jerome complimented my cooking and laughed at my jokes, I felt David's eyes on me. His approving smirk was unnerving, like he was orchestrating something I didn't fully understand. After Jerome left, David turned to me with a self-satisfied grin. "See? He's a great guy." "Don't start," I snapped, standing to clear the table. "It was just dinner." David leaned back in his chair, unconvinced. "You two got along really well. That's all I am saying." I ignored him, focusing instead on the dishes, though my hands trembled as I worked. A few days later, I received an unexpected text. "Thanks for the great dinner last night. David's lucky to have you." My heart skipped a beat. Why was Jerome texting me, and why did his message make my stomach flip? I told myself it was harmlesser, polite thank you, and resisted the urge to reply. But by lunchtime, curiosity got the better of me. "Glad you enjoyed it," I texted back, keeping it neutral. The messages became more frequent after that. They started as casual exchanges about food and work, but slowly drifted into more personal territory. When Jerome texted, "Wish I had a cook like you around all the time," I hesitated, unsure if he was flirting or if I was reading too much into it. David, oblivious as ever, brought up Jerome one evening while we were driving. He mentioned you guys had a good chat over dinner. "It was just small talk," I said, gripping the steering wheel. David nodded, his tone light. "He said you are easy to talk to. Thought that was nice." One evening, Jerome's texts turned outright flirtatious. "You have this energy about you. It's hard to ignore." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. This was crossing a line, but instead of shutting it down, I typed back, "Jerome, I don't think this is appropriate." Before I could send it, David walked into the room. "Who are you texting?" he asked casually. "No one," I said, locking my phone and setting it down. David gave me a curious look, but didn't press further. Things escalated when Jerome invited us to his apartment for dinner. I was reluctant, but David insisted. When we arrived, Jerome greeted us warmly, his smile lingering a little too long as his eyes met mine. His apartment was sleek and modern, with an air of understated sophistication. Dinner was delicious, but the tension in the room was palpable. Every time Jerome's gaze met mine, it felt heavy with unspoken words. David, either oblivious or intentionally ignoring the undercurrent, joked about how Jerome and I should team up to open a restaurant. "You'd make a great team," he said with a laugh. Jerome raised his glass. "I'd like that," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. That night, as I lay in bed, David's words from weeks ago echoed in my mind. "I think this could bring us closer." Closer to what? Disaster? The next morning, Jerome texted me again. "Good morning, beautiful. I hope today brings you as much joy as you bring others." I knew I needed to end this, but a part of me wasn't ready to let go of the attention, the excitement. Torn between loyalty to my marriage and the pull of something dangerously intoxicating, I typed back, "Jerome, we need to talk." He replied instantly, "Of course. When and where?" "Today. Somewhere public," I responded, my heart pounding. We agreed to meet at a cafe later that afternoon, and as I got ready to leave, guilt weighed heavily on my shoulders. I told myself this meeting was to set boundaries, to make things right. But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was the truth or just a convenient lie. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where people nursed their drinks in solitude, tucked behind laptops or newspapers. I spotted Jerome immediately. He was hard to miss. She's broad shoulders dwarfed the tiny chair he sat on, his confident posture drawing glances from a few patrons. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, and I hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "Of course," he replied, his voice warm. "I was surprised you wanted to talk, though. Everything okay?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Jerome, I think we've been crossing some lines that shouldn't be crossed. I am married. Whatever this is to stop." His expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something amusement, disappointment. "You are right," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "We shouldn't complicate things, but if I am being honest, I don't regret getting to know you." I felt my resolve waver, but I forced myself to hold firm. "I appreciate that, but it's not fair to David, or to you for that matter." Jerome nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand. No more texts, no more anything." I exhaled in relief. "Thank you." But as I left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't as resolved as they seemed. That evening, David was unusually cheerful. He cooked dinner, something he rarely did, and kept glancing at me with a smug smile. "What's with you?" I asked as we ate. He shrugged, his tone light. "Just happy. Things are finally falling into place." I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" David set his fork down and leaned forward, his eyes glinting with an intensity that made me uneasy. "I know about you and Jerome." My stomach dropped. "What?" "I am not blind, Anna. The texts, the looks you two exchange, I see it all." Panic rose in my chest. "David, He cut me off, his voice calm but firm. "Don't bother denying it. I am not mad. In fact, I think it's good for us." "Good for us?" I stared at him, incredulous. David smiled, his expression unsettlingly serene. "You've been so distant lately. I thought this might bring some excitement back into our lives. And it has, hasn't it?" I pushed my chair back, unable to sit still any longer. "This is insane. You are okay with me with Jerome?" David stood and crossed the room, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I am okay with anything that makes you happy, Anna. I trust you, but more importantly, I trust us." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they only made me feel trapped. I avoided Jerome after that. I didn't reply to his texts, didn't answer his calls, but he wasn't easily deterred. One evening, he showed up at my office, waiting for me in the parking lot. "Jerome, what are you doing here?" I asked, glancing around nervously. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice low. "You've been avoiding me." "Because I told you. This has to stop," I said, stepping back. But Jerome didn't back down. "Anna, I don't think you understand. David brought me into this for a reason. He wants me here. And honestly, so do you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? Jerome's smile was cold. You think this is all some coincidence? David and I have been talking about this for months. He wanted to shake things up. He thought I'd be good for you. I stared at him, my mind reeling. You are lying. Am I? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages before holding the screen up for me to see. There it was, a string of texts between him and David, discussing me like I was some kind of project. Why are you telling me this? I demanded, my voice shaking. Because I don't think you deserve to be manipulated like this, Jerome said. David's playing games, and you are stuck in the middle. When I confronted David that night, he didn't even try to deny it. I just wanted to help you find yourself again, he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. You've been so unhappy, Anna. I thought Jerome could spark something in you. You had no right, I shouted, my hands trembling. David sighed. Maybe not, but I did it for us, for you. For me? I laughed bitterly. You did this for yourself, to control me. His face darkened, the calm facade slipping. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is you dragging someone else into our marriage like it's some kind of game. The argument escalated, words flying like daggers. By the time it was over, I felt like a stranger in my own home. In the days that followed, I packed my things and moved out. David tried to apologize, to convince me to stay, but the damage was done. As for Jerome, he sent me one last text. I am sorry for my part in all of this. I hope you find what you are looking for. I didn't respond. For the first time in years, I was on my own, unsure of what came next. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't let anyone else dictate my happiness ever again.